I never imagined the deepest cut of my life would come from the person I loved most. One moment, I stood proudly inside the company I built from nothing, and the next I was being pushed out, dismissed as if my decades of sacrifice meant nothing. The shock was cold, but the betrayal, that was the kind of pain that cracks something inside you, the kind that lingers. I walked out of those doors carrying a wound only a mother could understand, yet with a fire that refused to die. And that was the moment everything truly began. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let's get started. I have walked through the doors of Harper & Company for most of my adult life, long enough for the scent of raw oak and walnut to feel like an extension of my own breathing. My name is Margaret Harper, though most people in High Point simply call me Maggie. At 68, I have spent 4 decades building this company with my own hands, my own stubbornness, and the quiet resilience that comes from believing in something no one else thought would survive. I built it with my husband, a man who loved wood the way other people love poetry. When he passed away more than 10 years ago, the company felt empty for a while, but I never doubted that I would keep it alive. He had trusted me to do that, and I have never failed him. Each morning begins the same way. I walk across the production floor where the clatter of saws and the gentle scrape of sandpaper form a rhythm that has marked the years of my life. The workers nod when they see me, and some of them smile the way you smile at a favorite aunt who has known you since childhood. I greet them by name, ask about their families, notice the details others overlook. The texture on a table leg, a small imperfection in the stain of a cherrywood drawer, a new apprentice trying too hard to look confident. These people trust me because I have always treated them as the heart of this company, and they are. High Point, North Carolina, calls itself the furniture capital of the United States, and in many ways it is true. The city breathes industry, tradition, and craft. Every year, global buyers come here, searching for pieces that tell stories. Harper & Company has become one of the names they ask for, not because we are large, but because we create things that outlive the trends. I have always believed that beauty matters more than speed, and that integrity matters more than volume. My son Nicholas grew up in these aisles. I still remember him as a boy racing between the workbenches, leaving fingerprints on the varnish of pieces that were supposed to dry undisturbed. He had his father's bright eyes and my impatience. When he grew older, he drifted away from the workshop and toward business schools, spreadsheets, and ideas about expansion. I was proud of his ambition, though sometimes I wondered if he understood the invisible weight this company carried. Tradition cannot be explained in a quarterly report. His wife, Cassandra, entered his life a few years ago. She was polished, articulate, and remarkably confident. I welcomed her warmly, though I often sensed a distance in her presence, a studied politeness that never softened. She came from a world of financial strategy, not craftsmanship, and while I never held that against her, I always felt she moved with a kind of purpose I could not read. This morning, as I walked through the shop floor, something felt different. A few workers kept their eyes on their tasks longer than usual. The air felt heavy, as if a storm had passed through before I arrived. I brushed it off as imagination. Maybe it was nerves. Today was the day I intended to formally hand the reins to Nick. I wanted him to have the chance to lead, to grow, to carry the name Harper into a new era. I believed it was the right moment. After inspecting one last cabinet frame, I stepped out of the workshop and crossed the courtyard toward the main office building. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel proud of the life I had built. I had no way of knowing that within the hour, everything I understood about my family, my company, and my place in it would begin to fracture in ways I could never have prepared for. The moment I stepped into the main office building, I sensed that something was wrong. Normally, mornings here were full of quiet movement, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of early conversations. But on this particular day, the air felt curiously still, as if the entire floor had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. A few employees glanced up when I entered, but instead of the usual warm smiles, their eyes darted away quickly. One young analyst nearly greeted me, then stopped mid-breath and pretended to study a stack of papers that were clearly blank. I told myself not to read too much into it, yet unease trailed behind me like a shadow. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of transition marked by pride rather than discomfort. I had spent months preparing Nicholas for this step, walking him through difficult decisions, teaching him which suppliers could be trusted and which needed careful handling, reminding him that leadership was not a performance, but a responsibility. I had convinced myself that he was ready, or at least willing to grow into the role. Still, an inexplicable heaviness settled in my chest as I walked deeper into the lobby. At the reception desk, Charlotte, who had worked with me for more than 20 years, looked up. Usually, she greeted me with a warmth that bordered on familial affection. Today, her expression flickered with something like panic before she quickly straightened her posture. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She lowered her gaze instead. I felt a slow, cold awareness crawl up my spine. It was the kind of reaction you expect when people are keeping a secret they are not allowed to share. The elevator ride to the executive floor was unusually quiet. The mechanical whir of the cables seemed louder than usual, echoing through the confined space as the numbers ticked upward. I watched my reflection in the brushed metal walls and tried to calm the prickle of intuition spreading beneath my skin. Perhaps it was simply the weight of letting go. Perhaps any mother who handed her life's work to her child felt this strange blend of nostalgia and anxiety. I repeated this thought, but it did little to steady me. When the elevator doors opened onto the 13th floor, the silence deepened. The hallway, typically filled with footsteps and conversation, felt unnervingly hollow. Two junior managers passed me, and instead of stopping to greet me, they quickened their pace, murmuring apologies before disappearing around a corner. A newly hired assistant nearly collided with me and blurted out a nervous excuse before shutting her office door too quickly. It slammed with a sharp finality. As I approached the conference area, I caught sight of Cassandra emerging from a meeting room. Her posture was as pristine as always, her dress immaculate, her phone glowing in her hand. She wore an expression of quiet satisfaction, one that faded only slightly when she noticed me. She offered a polite greeting, but the tone lacked warmth, as if she were fulfilling a social requirement rather than acknowledging her husband's mother. Something in her eyes made my stomach tighten. It was an expression I had seen only in people who believed they had already won. I continued down the hallway toward the office that had always been open to me. Today the door was shut, the blinds drawn halfway, leaving only a thin strip of light across the floor. I paused with my hand hovering over the handle. On the other side of that door, I heard the faint rustle of papers, the muted scrape of a chair. My breath caught in my throat. I did not know yet what waited for me inside. I did not know how sharply my world was about to tilt, but as I stood there, suspended in that narrow corridor of silence, I felt a warning pulse through me like a distant tremor. Something was coming, something irreversible. If you're still watching and feeling the tension building, comment number 2 below to let me know you're staying close. Now, let's move on to chapter 3, where the first real crack appears. The moment I opened the door to the executive office, a chill settled over me, sharp enough to stop my breath. Nicholas sat behind the desk that had once belonged to his father and later to me, but the way he occupied it now felt foreign, as if he were wearing a costume that did not quite fit. He did not rise to greet me. He did not even acknowledge that I had entered. His eyes remained fixed on the computer screen, his expression blank and metallic. Cassandra stood near the filing cabinet with her arms folded, her posture stiff and commanding. The faintest hint of satisfaction curved her lips when our eyes met. It was not a smile, but a proclamation. She had expected this moment. Perhaps she had even rehearsed it. The air in the room felt staged, as if every detail had been carefully arranged before my arrival. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Nicholas exhaled in a clipped, practiced tone I had never heard from him before. It was as if someone had drained every trace of warmth from his voice, leaving behind only steel. "We are removing you from the company immediately." The words hung in the room like a blade suspended above my head. He still did not look at me. Not once. He kept his eyes on the screen as if reading a script, as if saying these words to the woman who raised him required no more effort than approving a budget request. When he continued, his voice became even colder. "This woman will no longer have access to company property." This woman, not Mother, not Maggie, not even the name he used when he was frustrated or afraid. I felt the words slash through something tender inside me, but I refused to let my expression show it. My silence made Cassandra shift her weight, the sharp click of her heel echoing like an exclamation point. 2 security officers stepped into the room. Both men looked stricken, especially Daniel, whom I had known for more than 10 years. I had sent flowers when his wife gave birth to their son. I had approved his vacation time when he needed to care for his mother. Now, he would escort me out of my own company because my son had ordered him to. Cassandra extended her hand, her expression bright with victory that she tried poorly to mask. "We need your access badge." Her tone was crisp, almost rehearsed, as though she had been waiting for the chance to utter those words. I reached for my badge slowly, deliberately. The plastic surface felt oddly heavy, as if it carried every year of my life spent building Harper and Company. I placed it on the desk directly in front of Nicholas. Still, he did not look up. Pain pulsed through me, but anger simmered beneath it, clear and steady. I refused to let either emotion dictate my next move. Instead, I spoke evenly, choosing each word like a chess piece placed with intent. The board meeting this afternoon should be very interesting. The silence that followed revealed everything. Nicholas paused in mid-typing. Confusion flickered across his features, faint but unmistakable. He had no idea what I meant. Cassandra's expression tightened. I turned without waiting for a response. The walk back through the hallway felt longer than usual. Dozens of employees stared, some with shock, others with shame on my behalf. Yet I kept my shoulders straight. No one, not even my own son, would see me break. Inside the elevator, the moment the door slid shut, I let out a single quiet breath. Not a sob, not a sigh, a release. Then I reached into my purse and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Arthur, it is Maggie. I need you at my house in 1 hour. Bring the original documents." I ended the call. The elevator descended, and with each passing floor, one certainty grew sharper in my mind. Nicholas had just made the greatest mistake of his life. If you're still watching and the story has you leaning in a little more, comment number 3 below so I know you're following every turn. Now, let's move on to Chapter 4, where the pressure starts to rise. The drive home passed in a blur, though I remember every streetlight and every shadow as if they had been carved into the quiet ache inside my chest. High Point felt strangely unfamiliar, even though I had lived here most of my life. Storefronts I had passed 1,000 times looked duller, smaller, as if the world had shrunk from the weight of what had happened. I gripped the steering wheel more tightly than I needed to, not out of anger, but to keep my thoughts from drifting into the kind of sorrow that could swallow a person whole. The silence inside the car was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat, steady but weary. When I pulled into my driveway, the house stood exactly as it always had, a 2-story place with white shutters and a porch swing my husband built years ago. It was a comforting sight, yet stepping inside felt like stepping into a memory that no longer belonged to me. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, the scent I had used for decades. The photographs lining the hallway showed the story of a family that had once been whole. My husband smiling at our first workshop grand opening, Nicholas holding a toy hammer as a toddler, family dinners, holidays, milestones. Each frame was a reminder of a journey that now felt painfully fragile. I went to my study and opened the lower drawer of an old wooden filing cabinet. The metal rails rattled slightly as I pulled out a thick folder wrapped in brown paper. I had not touched it in years. Inside were the documents that formed the backbone of Harper & Company, articles of incorporation, the distribution of shares, partnership agreements, contracts signed with trembling optimism in the earliest days, and my husband's will. I traced my fingers across his signature, steady and confident even near the end. He had believed in me more than anyone. His will left complete control of the company in my name because, as he once told me, I understood its bones and its soul better than anyone. I felt a tightness in my throat as I remembered that conversation, the look in his eyes when he said he trusted me to protect what we built. A knock sounded at the door, firm but familiar. When I opened it, Arthur stood there with his leather briefcase in hand, looking as concerned as I had ever seen him. His white hair was a little disheveled, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much dishonesty in his lifetime. We sat together in the living room, the afternoon light spilling across the rug between us, and he opened the folder he had brought. He reviewed each document with practiced precision, his brow tightening as he read the bylaws aloud in a measured voice. According to every clause and every rule, Nicholas had possessed absolutely no authority to remove me. It was a violation not only of company procedure, but of legal governance. We both knew Nicholas had not conceived this plan alone. Cassandra's influence had grown stronger in recent months, her presence in meetings sharper, more intrusive. I admitted my suspicion quietly, and Arthur nodded without surprise. He asked if I still had access to the executive systems. I did. That had never been revoked because I had never officially stepped down. While Arthur made notes, I logged into the system and opened the communication archives. The earliest signs of irregularity began to emerge, small but telling. Unfamiliar consultants, strange transfers, messages written with deliberate vagueness. It was not enough yet, but it was the beginning of a trail. I closed the laptop and looked at the clock on the wall. The board meeting would take place in only a few hours. The real confrontation was coming, and for the first time since the morning, I felt a calm resolve settle into my chest. I did not yet know the full extent of what my son and his wife had done, but I would know before the end of the day, and when I knew, I would act. If you're still here, and the unraveling has you curious, comment number 4 below to let me know you're still with me. Now, let's move on to Chapter 5, where the storm finally breaks. When I walked back into the building that afternoon, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the morning. The humiliation I had endured only hours earlier still lingered somewhere deep inside me, but now it had hardened into something calmer, sharper, and far more controlled. Employees paused as I passed, their eyes widening not with confusion this time, but with a kind of silent recognition. They did not know what would happen, but they sensed a shift. I held my head high as I stepped into the elevator, feeling the steady rise beneath my feet as if the building itself acknowledged my return. The boardroom was already lit when I arrived. The long walnut table gleamed beneath the soft overhead lamps, and the leather chairs stood neatly arranged as though in anticipation of judgment. Arthur was placing folders along the table, each labeled carefully. He greeted me with a respectful nod before returning to his preparations. I took my seat at the head of the table, a place I had occupied for decades, and the familiar weight of responsibility settled around me like a well-worn coat. One by one, the board members entered. Robert arrived first, his expression stern. He embraced me tightly, a gesture that carried both anger on my behalf and loyalty. David followed with a stack of printed financial statements, shaking his head as if still unable to accept the chaos Nicholas had created. Susan entered last, quiet but visibly upset, her eyes hard with resolve. Their presence strengthened me. Whatever would unfold, I was not alone. When the door opened again, the air shifted. Nicholas stepped inside with forced confidence, his shoulders squared as though bracing for applause that would never come. Cassandra trailed behind him, her chin lifted, her gaze sweeping across the room with practiced poise. But I noticed the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around her phone. She sensed the danger, even if she did not fully understand its scale. Nicholas took the seat closest to the head of the table, directly across from me. His tone was clipped as he spoke. "You do not belong here. You retired this morning." His words fell flat in the silence that followed. The board did not react. Instead, their expressions hardened further, and Nicholas's composure began to crack around the edges. He glanced at them, expecting support he did not receive. Arthur stood and placed a thick document in front of him. "Per the corporate bylaws," he began, his voice firm, "only the majority shareholder may appoint or remove a chief executive officer." He turned to me, "And Mrs. Harper holds 80% of the shares." The color drained from Nicholas's face. Cassandra leaned forward as if to protest, but her voice faltered. I watched her carefully. Her confidence wavered for the first time. Arthur continued. He connected his laptop to the large display screen. The first set of emails filled the monitor, correspondence between Cassandra and a known competitor. The language was unmistakable: promises of access, preparations for a sale, mentions of 30% of Harper and Company, my company. Evidence of betrayal laid bare in black and white. A ripple of outrage swept through the board members. Cassandra's breath hitched. Nicholas stared at the emails as if seeing them for the first time. Then Arthur played the video. The image of me standing in Nicholas's office appeared on the screen, the cold dismissal, the words, "This woman," the smirk on Cassandra's face. The room filled with a kind of stunned, heavy silence. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon me. When I spoke, my voice was steady. "Now, Nicholas, you will understand that true power does not come from a title. It comes from integrity." The chapter closed on the edge of a storm. The silence in the boardroom after the video ended felt almost physical, as if the air itself had thickened into something dense and unmoving. I sat at the head of the table, my hands folded, my posture straight, but inside my chest a slow, deep ache pulsed with every breath. Across from me, my son Nicholas stared at the table with a vacant expression, as if he could not quite believe the collapse happening around him. Cassandra stood rigid beside him, her jaw clenched so tightly that a vein near her temple pulsed in sharp rhythm. No one spoke. It was the kind of silence that follows a blow so heavy everyone must take a moment to understand its full weight. Robert was the first to break. His palm hit the table with a force that echoed off the glass walls. He spoke with the fury of a man who had given decades to the company and was now watching betrayal unfold from within. David followed with measured anger. outlining the consequences the company would face if the attempted sale reached the public or the press. Susan leaned forward, her voice steady but cold, explaining how the document showed a systematic attempt to undermine every safeguards that I had put in place. Each word sliced deeper into the already splintering facade that Nicholas tried to maintain. Cassandra attempted one last defense. She spoke about strategic opportunities and misunderstood intentions, her voice too smooth and too quick. Her explanation crumbled the moment Arthur opened a folder and laid the contract drafts on the table. He explained that Asteria Holdings was known for predatory acquisitions, that the documents went beyond exploration and entered the territory of covert asset transfer. Cassandra's mask faltered. Fear flickered in her eyes. Nicholas stood, though his legs trembled beneath him. When he finally lifted his gaze toward me, the pain in his eyes nearly matched my own. I did not look away. I needed him to see my disappointment, the ache of a mother who had spent a lifetime building something he had nearly destroyed in a single morning. The board waited for me, but they were already aligned. Robert spoke again, calling for a vote to remove Nicholas as chief executive officer. Susan added that Cassandra needed to be barred from any corporate involvement. The others agreed without hesitation, but they did not act until I offered my stance. They respected my authority, but more than that, they respected the history this company carried. I spoke plainly. Nicholas had failed in judgment, integrity, and leadership, but he was still my son, and though I could not shield him from consequences, I could offer a path back to himself. I told him that accountability was not the end of a life, only the beginning of a new one. The room held its breath. Arthur placed the resignation document in front of Nicholas. There were only two choices: protect Cassandra and face legal consequences, or acknowledge his mistakes and step away from the seat he had desired his entire adult life. He looked at Cassandra, and for the first time, he saw her without the lens of infatuation. Her eyes held calculation, not loyalty. The realization broke something inside him. He picked up the pen with unsteady fingers and signed. Cassandra moved as if to stop him, but security intervened. Her sharp cry of frustration rang across the room. Nicholas sank back into his chair, drained. I did not reach for him, but I gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. A mother's version of a lifeline. The vote commenced. The future shifted, and Nicholas sat there, stripped of title, stripped of illusion, left only with the truth he had spent so long avoiding. If you're still watching and the confrontation left you breathless, comment number 6 below so I know you've made it this far. Now let's move on to Chapter 7. Everything changes from here. When the boardroom finally emptied, the silence that followed felt heavier than the arguments that had filled the room moments earlier. The air still carried the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had shattered, and everything that could never be repaired entirely. I remained seated at the head of the table, my fingers gently tracing the polished wood as if grounding myself after a storm. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, replaced by a slow, deep exhaustion that settled into my bones. Arthur closed his briefcase with deliberate care. He paused beside me, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. He did not offer hollow reassurances or dramatic words. He simply told me that I had done the right thing. Those few words carried a calm certainty that helped ease the sting of what had unfolded. After all, the truth about leadership was that even the right decisions could feel devastating. Soon it was just Nicholas and me. The room seemed larger with only the two of us inside, as though the walls had stepped back to give space to everything we were not saying. Nicholas stood near the far end of the table. His shoulders sagged in a way I had never seen before. The confident posture he had carried that morning had collapsed completely. He did not look like a chief executive officer. He did not even look like the young man who had once believed he could change the world. He looked lost. For a long moment, he struggled to speak. When his voice finally emerged, it carried none of the arrogance that had defined him in recent months. He apologized, not in a rushed or defensive way, but with a raw sign of raw honesty that made my throat tighten. He admitted that he had failed, that he had allowed Cassandra to manipulate him, that he had chosen ambition over integrity and pride over family. There were no excuses, only the truth he had run from for too long. I let him say every word, but when he was done, I told him something he had not expected. The deepest wound had not been the public humiliation. It had not been the dismissal or the disrespect. It had been the moment he refused to look at me, as though I were a burden, as though I were invisible. That cut deeper than his authority or his titles ever could. A mother could survive betrayal, but becoming a ghost in her child's eyes was something far more painful. Nicholas's face crumpled with regret. He explained how Cassandra had begun planting doubts months earlier, gentle suggestions at first, then sharper criticisms. Each one had chipped away at his confidence until he believed he needed to prove himself by breaking away from me entirely. He confessed that he had allowed his own insecurities to guide him, mistaking control for strength. I did not reach out to him. I did not offer comfort. Instead, I gave him clarity. An apology was not a resolution. Trust would not return quickly. The path forward would be long, difficult, and free of any shortcuts. If he wanted to rebuild his place in my life and in the company, he would have to work for it in a way he had never worked for anything before. He asked if forgiveness was possible. I told him the truth. Forgiveness, perhaps. Trust, only if he earned it. He left the room slowly, each step echoing with the weight of consequences he could no longer escape. I remained behind, staring out through the tall glass windows at the fading afternoon light. I had won the battle to protect my company, but the cost was carved deep within my heart. I woke at 6 a.m, long before the alarm could ring, as if my body refused to let me lie still any longer. The night had been short and heavy, but my mind felt strangely clear. I knew what waited for me at the office. I knew there could be no hesitation, no wavering, no sign of doubt. 40 years of leadership had trained me well. When a company trembles, its leader must become the anchor. I chose a pearl gray suit, one that conveyed steadiness without harshness. I tied my hair back neatly and looked at myself in the mirror. The reflection staring back did not look like a woman who had been thrown out of her own company the day before. It looked like the founder who had survived recessions, lawsuits, supplier collapses, and the sudden death of a husband. That woman could survive the betrayal of her only son, too. When I arrived at Harper & Company, the parking lot was half full. Small groups of employees stood near the entrance, whispering. Their glances shifted in my direction, not with fear, but with a collective yearning for clarity. Rumors had already taken on a life of their own. They needed answers. They needed stability. At 8 o'clock, Susan entered my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one on my desk and reported a rapid swirl of speculation taking over the company floors. Some believed Nicholas had initiated an internal restructuring. Others said I had resigned voluntarily. A few, more dramatic souls, insisted there had been a coup. We both agreed that a full company meeting was the only way to restore calm. I reviewed my speech carefully. It needed to strike a balance, firm but not cruel, transparent but not destructive, honest but not humiliating. The company had to emerge stronger from this, not divided. At 9 o'clock sharp, I stepped into the auditorium. More than 200 employees were gathered, filling every row, every corner. The moment I appeared, the murmurs fell into complete silence. I walked toward the podium, steady and composed. My heart felt heavy with responsibility, but not with fear. I explained what had happened in clear, measured terms. I told them there had been a misunderstanding of authority. I did not mention Cassandra by name. I did not need to. I clarified that I had never resigned and that I still owned 80% of the company. I announced the board's decision to remove Nicholas as chief executive officer and my temporary return for 6 months while we searched for a qualified successor from outside. Then I called Nicholas forward. He approached slowly, visibly shaken, but not hiding from the moment. When he spoke, his voice trembled yet carried sincerity. He apologized to the company, acknowledging his mistakes without excuse. He said he would be working in every department for 6 months to understand the business from the ground up. It was not dramatic, but it was honest, and that mattered. The employees listened. Some nodded in approval. Others rested their hands over their hearts. When the meeting ended, the air felt lighter, steadier. People left the room speaking not with fear, but with quiet confidence. I returned to my office feeling, for the first time since the ordeal began, something close to peace. I had not solved everything, not yet, but I had taken the first true step toward rebuilding what had been broken. And the path ahead, though difficult, no longer felt impossible. If you're still watching and the shift toward healing resonates with you, comment number 8 below to let me know you're still on this journey. Now, let's move into the final chapters, where everything comes full circle. 6 months passed with a steadiness I had not felt in years. Each day brought a sense of structure back into Harper & Company, as if the company itself had been waiting to exhale. Under my temporary leadership, projects returned to their usual pace, contracts resumed without hesitation, and the energy among the employees lifted gradually. Departments that had been shaken regained their rhythm, and meetings shifted from tense and uncertain to productive and optimistic. I watched the transition quietly, feeling gratitude rather than pride. Stability had returned because everyone chose to rebuild together. During those same months, I observed Nicholas from a distance. He kept his word and rotated through every department without protest. Employees who had once viewed him with skepticism began to speak differently about him. In the production floor, I saw him handling fabric rolls with the same care as the workers who had been there for decades. In logistics, I heard that he asked thoughtful questions and stayed late to understand schedules and supply flows. In sales, the team praised his openness to learning, especially his willingness to listen to clients rather than talk over them. The change was slow, but undeniably real. By the end of the 6 months, every department head submitted feedback. All of them recognized growth in him. They mentioned his humility, his respectfulness, and his genuine curiosity. It was the kind of progress I had hoped for, but had not dared to expect. His journey had not erased the hurt he caused, but it had shown me that he was trying to rebuild himself, not just his reputation. Meanwhile, the search for a new chief executive officer led us to Catherine, a woman with 25 years of experience in consumer goods manufacturing. She carried the steadiness of someone who had navigated difficult markets and the clarity of a leader who understood people as much as numbers. The board approved her almost unanimously. I sensed in her the right combination of strength and empathy to guide the company long after I stepped back into the background. The day of the transition ceremony arrived quietly. Employees gathered in the main atrium, and when I spoke my final words as interim leader, applause rose from all corners of the room. It was not loud or celebratory in a dramatic way. It was warm, sincere, and full of gratitude. I handed Catherine the keys to the office that had once been mine for so many years. Instead of sadness, I felt relief. My role had never been meant to be permanent again. After the ceremony, Nicholas came to find me. He closed the door behind him and stood with the calm posture of someone who had faced himself and survived. He thanked me for not giving up on him, for giving him a chance to rebuild rather than pushing him away. He told me about the therapy sessions he had attended, about the painful truths he had uncovered in himself, and about how determined he was to continue becoming better. When he hugged me, it was different from all the forced or hurried embraces of the past. This one carried sincerity, humility, and a quiet promise. That evening, I sat at home in my living room, surrounded by the photographs that recorded the history of my life, the company, my husband, my young son, the early years of struggle. I thought about the day Nicholas forced me out and the long road we traveled to return to this moment. The storm had passed. The sky was clear again. I had won more than my company back. I had reclaimed my son. That night, after the ceremony and the conversation that had closed a long, painful chapter, I returned home to a silence that felt gentle rather than lonely. The house was dimly lit, the kind of warmth that greeted me without demanding anything in return. I set down my purse, poured a glass of water, and allowed myself to simply breathe. For the first time in many months, my heart felt steady. I settled onto the sofa and let my eyes wander to the photographs lining the wall. Each frame held a piece of the journey. There was the small workshop where my husband and I had worked side by side, our hands stained with the fabric dye and ink from handwritten invoices. There was the first factory opening, all smiles and nervous pride. And there was Nicholas as a child, standing beside a sewing machine with eyes full of curiosity and admiration. Those moments felt far away yet still deeply alive. My thoughts drifted back to the morning he forced me out of the company. I remembered the shock, the hollow ache, the feeling of being erased by someone I had raised. But now, with distance and clarity, I saw that moment differently. It had stripped away the illusions both of us carried and forced us to confront who we truly were. I realized that survival did not come from anger or retaliation. It came from standing firm, trusting my knowledge, and responding with dignity rather than rage. My strength had never depended on a title. It had always come from resilience. The company had healed. Nicholas had changed. And I had rediscovered a version of myself that was stronger than the storm we had endured. Power, I understood now, was not loud or forceful. It was quiet, deliberate, and rooted in integrity. As I sat there, I felt a shift inside me. I no longer feared stepping away from leadership. Instead, there was a gentle excitement about the quiet years ahead. I wanted to write the story of Harper and Company from the beginning, to leave a record for future generations so they would understand the sacrifices, the lessons, and the values that built our family legacy. Everything had changed, but not everything was lost. Forgiveness was beginning to grow, cautious but sincere. Trust would take longer, yet the path was open. I ended the night with one quiet truth. Life will wound you, often through those you love most, but you always have the choice to rise with grace. In the end, every storm leaves behind a clearer sky. What once felt like betrayal and collapse slowly reveals itself as a turning point, the kind that strips away illusions and forces the heart to grow in unexpected ways. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not the ones won in boardrooms, but the quiet ones earned within oneself. Power proves itself not through domination, but through grace, discipline, and the courage to stand firm when everything familiar seems to fall apart. Healing, too, comes in its own time, through honesty, humility, and the willingness to rebuild trust one truth at a time. And perhaps the most meaningful lesson is this: even when the world shakes beneath your feet, you can still choose to rise with dignity. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched you, Please share your thoughts in the comments, follow the channel, and subscribe for more.